Today, I want to show you a fantastic, historic, and delicious recipe. Wanted to make a bread recipe. You know, right now, not a lot of folks are really in the mood to go to the store. For reference for the future, this is March of 2020. So yeah, not many people want to go to the store right now. They're kind of avoiding it. Instead of going out to get bread, we'll just do it without. Instead of doing it without, why don't you do it with? Let me show you how to make French bread today. And so you'll know, when it comes to bread making, French bread is that's where the bar is, okay? And that's where things start when it comes to really nice, crusty, delicious breads. French bread is that one that when it rises up, it's light, dry on the inside. It is hard and crispy and crunchy on the outside, and fantastic. Folks, French bread is 4 ingredients. It's easy to make, and once you learn the ins and outs of it, you'll feel a lot less like just running up to the store for a loaf of French bread. It's mostly a matter of time consuming, if you want to get right down to it. The hardest thing about making French bread is waiting for it to rise. And the reason that's hard is because you know what it's going to taste like when it's done, and you don't want to wait for it to rise. So that's the hardest part. Folks, let's get in the kitchen. We're going to make us some French bread today. I can't wait to dig in. Come on. The ingredients for making French bread are as basic and simple as it gets for bread making. It's flour, water, salt, and yeast. That's it. No sugar, no other additives, nothing fancy, just flour, water, salt, and yeast. Nothing more. And that's the neat thing about French bread, and one of the neat characteristics about it is that the fact that it is made so simply. Now, I've got 2 different kinds of flour out here. I've got this all-purpose flour, and I've got high gluten flour. What does that mean? Okay, well, all-purpose flour is just that. It's for making everything. You can do breads and cakes and everything, and that's got sort of a middle-of-the-road kind of gluten count on it. If you get a cake flour, it has almost no gluten, and if you get bread flour, you're getting high gluten flour, which is what I write on the bag there, high gluten flour. Let me sit down here for a sec. I want to have a real frank discussion about bread making and flour. Folks, it works like this. Let's say that you buy brand X flour. That's an example. And you purchase brand X flour, let's say in January, all right? And you use it through the months, and then come summer, and of course you're out of flour, you decide, oh, I want to do something that requires making flour. So you go out and purchase your favorite brand X flour, which is identical to the brand X flour that you got in January, or so you think. Well, the funny thing is, you developed wonderful recipes in January. And then come August, July, August, you want to show off to your friends these recipes you developed. You mix the recipe up, and suddenly you notice your batch is way thicker. And maybe you think that you measured wrong. Or maybe it was your batch comes out way too thin. And again, you're wondering, did I put enough in there? Did I measure this wrong? What's different? So let me explain to you. The reason that happens, and if you've ever baked any at all, you've seen this happen in your baking, and here is why. When flour is, let's go back to the farm. When wheat is grown, different conditions equal different kernels of wheat, okay? Now let me explain what that means. If you have a year that gets lots of rain, okay, and it's been a very hardy year, and the wheat grows nice and strong, you're going to have these big plump kernels of wheat, and they're going to respond one way, or when ground into flour, that flour will respond one way to liquid being added to it. In other words, it'll hydrate in a certain way. And then let's say 6 months later, another batch of wheat has been grown, but that batch didn't really get quite as much rain, and maybe the sun wasn't quite as full those months. And so the wheat came out a little weaker, and the kernels were smaller, and so they grind that up, make it flour, and suddenly you're measuring your flour out thinking you got the same thing, and it's acting different. And that's because wheat grown in different seasons, different climates, different times, different ways will respond different to hydrating, plain and simple. So if I give you a recipe and say this takes 4.5 cups, and you say, well, it doesn't look like yours on the video. Yours looked like this, and now mine looks like that. Why? Well, it's because your flour hydrated different than mine. It's all there is to it. So when your dough is either too stiff or too wet, this is exact reason. You can measure flour exactly every single time, and every time between batches, you're going to get different results. Now they have kind of stabilized that a lot in you know, the couple recent in the last decades, but they haven't controlled it completely, and that's because you can't control everything about wheat. And there's also different kinds of wheat, and you produce flour from wheat A one year, and then they don't grow enough wheat A the next year, so they have to switch to wheat B and grind that instead. Well, then you see a difference in, again, the way that dough is going to react. Okay, so that's the story about flour. Now, I'm going to be using this high gluten flour today, and high gluten flour is important. It gives an extra stretchy quality to the bread. The reason? Gluten is a protein. Gluten is sticky. Proteins are sticky. They're that way, okay? And so when you get that extra sticky quality in the dough, after it is cooked, it keeps that rubbery, elastic kind of quality. It keeps it and imparts it to the dough. The dough becomes a part of that. And so that's the thing, is you can use the all-purpose flour, but your bread will come out nice, but it's not going to be quite the same. Once you tried once you've tried bread flour, you'll know exactly what I mean. Now, the second thing today, we're going to be checking our yeast, and I'm going to teach you how to make sure that your yeast is good. We're going to get into that next, and some lessons on the right kinds of bowls to use to rise and stuff like that. This is a good lesson on making bread. When you're making bread, it is a very smart thing to do to make sure the yeast is good. You don't know if that yeast is good or not. You're hoping it's good, you think it's good, but you don't know. There's one way to find out. You simply pour the yeast into the water and stir it up. Now, the problem I have here is that my water is the water I pulled out, you know, to do the intro on the show. It's cold. I need hot water here. Now, here's the thing. If the water's so hot that you can't stick your finger in it and keep it in there, it's too hot. Okay? You need it comfortable for the yeast. You don't want to kill the yeast with hot water. Okay? So you don't use boiling water. You simply use good hot tap water like you would for like washing your hands. It's a good temperature. And the yeast will grow well at that temperature. So I'm going to get fresh water, and then we are going to mix this yeast into it, and we'll give it a few minutes and find out if the yeast is worth a darn or not. Now I've got some hot water here. So check it with my finger. Okay, I can keep my finger in it. It's hot, I can tell that, but it's not so hot that my finger can't handle that heat. Okay, so that's a good temperature for my yeast right there. It's going to get it woke up real good and quick. I'm going to take it and just mix it in. It's a pretty simple thing to do. And at first, some of it will act like it doesn't want to mix. Don't worry, it will. It'll dissolve. I have to admit that I've got a little too much experience with yeast. I do a lot of things with yeast. Brewing, for example. I've done a lot of brewing. And of course, you can't brew unless you've got yeast to brew with. So, very important that we have yeast, because so many things that we use and enjoy rely on yeast. This is a very important ingredient. And folks, let me tell you, when it comes to what's healthy, yeast is absolutely loaded with B complex vitamins, okay? If you've ever seen the label on your bread and it shows that there's lots of B complex vitamins, it came from the yeast, okay? It's just that simple. And so, you know, beer, if you're drinking beer that has live yeast in it, you know, like a homemade brew, then you're drinking a beer that is loaded with B complex vitamins. So do yourself a favor, enjoy your yeast. It's good stuff. Now we're going to give it that a few minutes and see how well it rises up on us. There we go. I wanted to get a good close-up shot of this before and after proofing, and that way you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about. We need to show the change, as it were. Okay, there's your 15-minute time lapse. Wasn't that cool? As you see, there is a difference here. Okay, there's a difference on the top. There is a serious difference on the side. You can see some layering going on here. When you see this happening with yeast, and it's a little foamy on top like it is there, guess what, folks? The yeast is good. All right, that's the proof that it's good. If it was just still mixed up looking like it was when I first mixed it, then that would mean that the yeast is dead, that it's no good. But since it's doing all of this, that's activity, that's active product, so it's good, and that will make for good bread. Let's move on to the next step, which is breaking out the mixer and getting this thing put together. It's not that tough. You're gonna like this. I have my yeast. It's all ready to go. Get yourself a little scoop. I like to use a measuring cup for this. I use a 1/2 cup size to get the flour from in here to in here. It's a little bit cleaner when you're first starting this. Something I want to mention, do not pour the salt down into the yeast. No, no. Salt and yeast do not get along very well. Salt will kill yeast. And it's sort of the same way with metal. For some reason, yeast just doesn't get along with certain things. And metal will retard the growth of yeast. So we don't rise yeast in metal bowls. We do not rise bread in metal bowls. We rise the dough either in a glass, plastic, or ceramic, and it will keep from retarding growth on the dough that way. Now I mix the salt right there into my flour. Let's go ahead and get this on here. Now I'm using just a plain dough hook, and I want to say this. This is a machine that is so important to bread making. Folks, this machine was actually first originally invented for the purpose of providing food to troops. The Troy-Bilt Corporation created the very first mixer that was provided to the U.S. Army to help feed the troops. And so that was how they came about. As with many things in the kitchen, a lot of things in the kitchen started with the military. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's so true. A microwave oven is another good example. That was invented by the military, okay? So, here we go. I'm going to lower that. Well, we don't have to. We can go ahead and get some of the flour in there now. This is just pretty simple. Get it in there, get it mixed, and you're going to start looking at the quality of the dough. What we're looking for is to produce a dough that is, let's see, I want it sticky, okay? Here's the thing, when you're making dough, you've seen some bread, you break it open and it's very even on the inside. The pores are smooth, like a perfect man-made, foam rubber or something. And that's sort of like white bread. White bread's that way. Okay, and that's what they call an even crumb. And if you have a coarse crumb, that would be a bread that you open up and you see big pockets of air in there and small ones, and they're all different sizes. That's a coarse crumb. The coarse crumb comes from a bread that has high hydration. In other words, a lot of liquid in it. The smooth breads come from, like white bread, come from a dough that is not so hydrated, not so sticky. So I'm wanting a very sticky dough. Always start this on a low speed, okay? Well, we started with a given amount of flour. I'm not going to use all that flour. I'm going to save back, about a half a cup or a little more. And that way, if I need more flour, I can add it easily. But if my dough comes out too dry, then I know to hold back on some of that. And as I told you before, a recipe written doesn't always work that way when it comes to flour, because flour is fickle when it comes to taking in moisture. Okay, there we go. There's 2 slow settings on one of these type of mixers, and you have this one and this one. This one's commonly used for kneading. This one's commonly used for taking in taking in ingredients. Now I can see that is a very, very moist dough. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a little more flour. Now, when it looks like it's just kind of all weird and sloppy like that, you got to give it a few minutes, okay? There's no rush on this. Let the machine do what it does when it comes to mixing it together. I want to take a look at this now. Okay, this is extremely sticky. You see, it's coming right off on my skin. Okay, this is a little higher hydration than I'm looking for, but it's really firm down on the bottom, which means it's not evenly mixed yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more of my flour. I'm going to get this dough off of my hands. We'll add in a little more flour. Let that work in, and then we'll see the consistency of the dough and see if I need to add in what little I have left. So that's how we work it out. All right, this has been running for a few minutes, and I've let that dough get fully mixed and to knead just a little bit. Okay, now I've got a fairly stretchy, somewhat sticky dough here, sticking to me a little bit, but not badly. And so this is kind of what I'm looking for, actually. So guess what? I'm gonna stick this right back down in there. It looks like I have got maybe, almost, if I want to guess, I want to say about a quarter to a third of a cup left of flour. All right, now I'm still going to use that. When I go to rolling this out, I'm going to need that extra flour, all right? But this shows you that when you go to mixing it together, if you're looking for sticky dough like this, then you got to just add it a little at a time. And a lot of times, a written recipe is only a general guide, especially when it comes to stuff with flour. So be ready for that, folks. Now, I'm going to get back to kneading this. I'm going to let it knead for a little while. And I have, whoops. So we're going to get back to kneading this for a little while. And I have a redneck fix right here. We'll put that there. Put that right there. There we go. That'll keep that head nice and secure. This has been running for about 5 minutes. I'll take my redneck fix right off of here. There we go. And there's our dough. Okay, just as simple. And while it's still on the hook, I'm going to take it off. Hey, looky there. Now, that's what I'm looking for in a really decent dough. It's somewhat sticky, it's quite elastic and stretchy, and it's just perfect, all right? So what I want to do is I want to put that dough right in here. Here's the thing, as this starts to rise, it's going to stick to the bowl, all right? Don't want that to happen, okay? So I'm going to put just a tiny little dollop of olive oil in there, not even a quarter of a teaspoon. And all I'm doing is just gently rubbing the bowl. This is important. It looks kind of silly, but trust me, you're going to want this. When it comes to removing it, it gets kind of difficult. And why are we having to remove it? Well, we're going to have to roll it out in a little bit, but we're going to rise this more than once, and we're going to rise it in this bowl. So it gets risen up until it's domed up and it's tripled in size, and then we're going to rise it a second time the same exact way, and then we'll roll it out into little pieces that we will turn into our bread. Now this, here we go. There we are. So here is our dough. It feels nice and sticky to me. It feels good to me, even though a little bit of it's coming off on my fingers. That's exactly where I want it. Okay, if it's tiny bits coming off on your hand, like this, you've got it in the right spot, folks. It's very soft, and it smells delicious, all right? Boom, right in the bowl. Now, I want to say something before we move on. You notice I'm using a glass bowl. And even though I may have mentioned this before, I want to mention it again. When you're rising your bread, use glass. If you don't have glass, use plastic. If you don't have plastic, use ceramic. It doesn't get along well in metal bowls, okay? So if you put it down in a copper or a steel bowl, the bottom part of it will not be as active in the rise as the rest of the dough will be. And you'll see a difference when you pull it out. This way allows a good rise, and I do what I call a rising kit, which is simply another bowl inverted, and I keep these in a warm spot. That's all there is to it. My dough's risen up. Here we go. Look at that, folks. It has tripled in bulk, and that's what we're looking for, to dome up out of that bowl the way I have it here. Now, if your bowl's bigger or smaller, well, it might work a little different. But the thing of it is we got good even rise. You can see the bubbles down here on the side of the of that dough, and that is just a good sign. And you see, if you have steel or something like that, you won't get this happening. The rising doesn't work as well. So that's why we use that glass. Now at this point we punch it down, and this is somewhat satisfying. There we go. Yep, it is, it really is. So I'm going to take that dough, which is, you see how it's stuck, even though I put oil in there? Yeah, that happens. Just get used to it. There we go. Now I want to kind of roll it and knead it just a little bit. There we are. Yeah, right back in there. All right, my dough set up. It's going to rise again. Same way, cover it with the bowl and let it sit there and grow nice and big. Look at that. It rose up so high, it's stuck to this bowl, all right? So that's really rising up, and that's really what I wanted to do. So now it's time to punch it down and get it rolled out. I need the right kind of board up here. I need what's called a pastry board, and that would be a cutting board that's in the color of white. Cutting boards are color coded in commercial cooking, and you should consider that too in your home. It's a safe way to control the pathogen, the movement of pathogens. So you know, you don't want anything from meat getting into your dough, or anything you know, from let's say raw meat getting into let's say cheese. You're going to cut cheese and serve it fresh, and you don't want to use the same board you processed fish on, because then you're running a risk. And that's where having colored boards really comes in handy. So it's a pretty smart thing. So we see how it's going on down here. Let's take a look. Oh, there we go. See, we've got lots of those bubbles down in the side here. It's just, there's a lot of texture already occurring, and that's a good sign. That's showing us what it's going to look like after the dough has risen up and been baked. All right, there we go. That's always a little bit fun, but yeah, you can get it on you. Remember, it's a bit sticky, okay? So be prepared for that. It's sticking a little bit. Okay, anyway, I'm going to get my board ready, get some flour out here, and we're going to get busy prying that out of the bowl. There are a few neat little toys that I would like to tell you about when it comes to bread making. Of Cool toy number one is this guy here. These are little misting bottles that you can pressurize yourself. They pump up with the little pump in the lid, and there is just a regular sprayer trigger. I've been using this one for years, and it's been serving me well. I have one of these for oil. This one's for water, and I use it for spraying the loaves to make the surface of the loaf crisp up better. It's a neat little technique we're going to get into in a minute. Having a spray bottle is a really important thing for what is coming up next. So see if you can get a hold of that, or just a regular trigger sprayer that's for water. That'll work fine also. This right here is a neat little thing. Maybe you've seen it before, or maybe not. This is called a pastry knife. It's commonly used when you're making doughs and things like that, because it helps you to divide the dough. It's handy, all right? They work well. Cornmeal. Cornmeal is what we call non-stick in the baking world. If you need something to be non-stick, you break out the cornmeal. It's just all there is to it. Okay, and that's when you're baking. Okay, so when we go to rolling out the dough to keep it from sticking on the board or to our hands, we're going to be using flour then. But for this, I want to use cornmeal, and it works very well. And it looks like I've got too much on there. Well, guys, I really don't. I've got maybe a little less than enough. Okay, so all of those little bare areas I kind of want filled. There we go. And the neat thing about bread making is it can really kind of keep your attention centered, and it makes a day that seems boring or slow a lot more interesting. Bread making is cool. You should try it. If you've never done it, it is the neatest thing, and I'm glad you're watching this video. This is ready to go. Let me get it over here. As I mentioned to you, get my cornmeal off of there. As I mentioned to you, I'm going to be using this. Now, for me to use this, it needs to be in a couple of places. It needs to be on my hands, so the dough doesn't stick to me, and it needs to be on my board so the dough doesn't stick to it. Because remember, we got something of a sticky dough going on here. It's not terrible. It's workable, but it's got its own thing going on. Okay, I want to divide this in half. I don't know how close these loaves are going to be, but I'm just going to kind of go down where it kind of looks like half to me. Hopefully they're similar. Now, these, we've got to roll them into cylinders, all right? One of these I'm going to put back in the same bowl, and the other one I'm going to start working out. Now, there's some fancy ways of rolling this out. One was, the first one I was taught, which was you cut the dough, into 3 pieces. You make a little larger batch than this, and then you fold that into a triangle, and then make it into a cylinder, and then do this to the cylinder and fold it over, and then roll it out again, and and that works. I'll tell you what it does. It makes a nice little cylinder. But as you can see, if you just take it and kind of work it out, that's all it takes, folks. You don't have to get all fancy about folding it and stuff like that. Now, right now, this, get those folds out of it. That one might act a little funky on me. We'll see. See how it's got little folds there? Oh, no. There we go. So that's a fairly good sized cylinder of dough, isn't it? That's ready for my pan. So I can transfer that over there. And then this, once it rises up and it triples in size again, we're going to put that in the oven, and we're going to cook these things up. God, I was looking so forward to it. See how easy that was? There was no real effort in this. Alrighty, right over here. So the thing of it is those can bump the ends a little bit, won't hurt a thing. Just kind of set them in there. They're ready to go, folks. Yeah, I know, I got way too much cornmeal. I always do that, but you know what? It's not so expensive. Folks, we gotta let it rise. so it's a matter of waiting for it to triple in size again. I'm going to put some plastic wrap over this so that it will be kept moist. I want to keep the dough as moist as possible. I don't want it drying out too much. And before it goes in the oven, that's when we're going to hit it with water. And you'd be surprised what water does to dough like this. It's just amazing. All right, here we go. You see, I like to call this stuff sticks only to itself wrap because that's about what it's good for. Anyway, I cover lightly the pan with a little bit of plastic wrap, and that's to keep these things on the moist side, okay? Now I added a little bit of flour on the outside, not a big deal. And that adds for a character on the loaf. And then don't worry about the cornmeal, it just brushes off after you've cooked it. So it's really cool. Folks, these need to triple in bulk again. There are going to be some fairly fat loaves for French loaves. So I'm not going with the skinny baguette, I'm going to go with the bigger ones, and that's what these will be. They'll be very close together when I'm finished rising them up. These have been rising for roughly 30 minutes. My timer's about to go off. It's actually 2 minutes left. There we go. I have this big old pan out here because I'm going to use it to create steam. You see, here's the thing. When a professional kitchen, let's say you go to a bakery kitchen, the ovens that look just like regular commercial ovens have one difference. That difference is they hook up to a water line. And the water line is designed to spray water into the oven on a regular basis to keep humidity and moisture in there. You need a really humid oven in order for bread to bake up well. The more humid it is, the better the crust comes out. That's all there is to it. This is a fact. I've done it many times both ways. So I'm going to put this pan in the bottom of the oven, and the minute that these get ready to go in there, I'm going to pour water in there, and it'll create a whole bunch of steam instantly. These go in, and then we're up and cooking. As I'm cooking, I'll pull these out occasionally, spray them with water, and that's what our spray bottle is for. So, and that's this guy here. That's what's going to happen. We just wait for these to rise a little bit more, but right now I need to get this in the bottom of the oven. Let me get it down there. And I want to turn my oven on, and that's going to be to 450 degrees. Now 450 degrees might seem a little bit hot, but it really is not for bread. Bread cooks at high temperatures, guys, and when you have a real high temperature and you keep the crust as moist as possible, you end up with a very high quality crispy crust product. And that's part of creating crispy crust that comes out like French bread crust. And that's what we're looking for, something hard on the outside. It is important to remember when heating this oven up, we got to heat it up for quite some time. I've only 30 minutes in on the rising here, and I'm heating my oven up to 450 degrees. There could be another 30 minutes or more to go on the bread loaves. I don't need just the air on the inside of the oven hot. I need the walls and the top and the bottom hot. I need the whole thing radiating so much heat that when I open this door and close it again multiple times, that it doesn't seriously affect the heat on the inside. I need it radiant to that point. So preheating for a long period of time gives you that condition. It's not to waste fuel, it's to create the condition that's needed for good, crusty bread. This has been rising now for about 50 minutes. Okay, and I want to tell you something. Rise times don't mean anything. Okay, because though it may be 50 minutes today, this or this may take an hour one time, and it may take 2 or 3 hours the next time. Bread is fickle that way, so you just kind of got to oblige it. Okay, so I have my sprayer here. Something that happens when you spray bread like this, sometimes you will see it expand a little bit, especially if it's getting dried out on the outer part. That is simply the outer part of the crust expanding a little bit and softening so that the air inside, or I should say carbon dioxide, can push out. And that's exactly what it does. So I like to give them a little spray. Now I'm going to cover that back up again in just a moment. I'm going to let it skin just a bit at first, just take in that moisture. Then I'll cover it again, let them finish rising some more. Before these go in the oven, they're going to get a good spray just like that. After they hit the oven, they're going to get more sprays. I'll be spraying them regularly after they hit the oven, and that'll be about every 3 to 4 minutes. I'll pull them out and spray them down. These have had plenty of time. They've moved out a little more than up, and that's common when you have high hydration dough, so don't think that's like too weird or anything. I'm going to spray it again, which will give it a little more lift, and then we're going to go in the oven with them. There we go. Now I'm going to transfer this over here. We're going to get it down in the oven. Now that I have this bread ready, get my water over here and a couple of other things. It's kind of customary to put some slash marks across your bread right before you bake it. Okay, and this is done to allow expansion. In other words, it breaks open that top layer just a little bit to allow it to open up. And you don't have to cut deep, just cut through the very top. This needs to go in that pan that we put in the bottom of the oven that's now 450 degrees. It's going to kick off a lot of steam right at first, and just as it's doing that, we're shoving this in the oven right afterwards. So be ready for that to happen. Woo! There we go. Now that will go ahead and provide good steam in there, and it's going to help that crust get really, really perfect. The idea is to slow down the cooking on the crust, to give the inside of the loaf a little more time to dry out and the crust to get dark and hard. It has been 3 minutes. I need to mist it. In the oven, keep on cooking. Oh, they're looking beautiful. Another 3 minutes. I'm gonna spray it down one more time. It is starting to smell fantastic, folks. I can't tell you just how delicious this smells. Oh, wow. It's great. I've still got plenty of water in the bottom, but there we are. We're just going to add a little to it to make sure there's plenty of steam. It was steaming nice, and I want to make sure it stays that way. The amount that we started with today was 4.5 cups of flour, 1.5 cups of water, 4.5 teaspoons of yeast. That's the same as 2 packages of dry yeast. 2 teaspoons of salt. And folks, as I mentioned, if you need a little more water or a little more flour, you got to add those to get that right quality from the bread. Now let's take a look. We got some gorgeous loaves coming out. All right. That's what I'm talking about. That's French bread, ladies and gentlemen. Oh boy, it looks good. I can't wait to dig in. Here's the thing. You can eat bread warm, but not fresh from the oven. It's so hot it'll burn you badly. So don't do that. Let it cool a little bit. When it's still warm, then cut into it. But it needs to be cool enough that you can handle it with your bare hands. Okay, so time. Plenty of time there. There's no rush. Oh, the bread's out of the oven. We're going to give it a cut. Take a look. Oh, looky there. That is a gorgeous French loaf, folks. That's what I'm looking for. A nice crumb, lots of big pockets, not perfectly even. That's not what I wanted. I wanted this. And that's exactly what I got, was just that kind of perfect. I've been sitting here enjoying this wonderful bread. The crumb on it, absolutely perfect. Fantastic bread, folks. The flavor, spot on perfect, delicious. It's exactly what French bread is supposed to be. That is really good. Please enjoy your bread. Take a look at my channel. That's Texas Cooking Today. You see it there. Please take a look at my website. That's where you're going to find caps like this. I'm about to put out an apron. My recipes are on that site. Prints, shirts like this, all kinds of neat stuff. Anything that I'm going to be putting out in the future is pushed towards artistic endeavors will be marketed through that site. So folks, thank you very much, and please enjoy that French bread. That's some good stuff. Oh, and stay safe from the corona. I don't want to lose any of my viewers, dang it. Be safe.